Hi guys, Ross here and welcome back to another video. So today's going to be something a little bit different. I'm essentially going to be doing like a speed art slash process video. So what I've done is I've created a glass render here because Render Weekly on Instagram are currently doing like glass renders as their theme for the week, I suppose. So I thought I'd jump on it and just brush up my skills on glasses and liquids. In total, it took me about 2 hours, but I think I've sped this video down to about 10. And I just thought I would kind of like talk over the top of the video and, not make it as much of a tutorial, but more just kind of like me talking about what I'm doing and where my head's at with the process. So at the moment, what you're seeing is me developing the glass. And I'm actually using the lathe NURBS, which I believe I kind of covered in my previous video. Really straightforward. You essentially create a spline and then it will revolve that spline around 360 degrees. So that way you can get like really quick glass structure. And then what I've done here is create some cubes and added displacers to them just to kind of roughen the edges a little bit and give those like surface imperfections before I even texture them. And I've just placed those ice cubes within the liquid of our container. So what I'm doing now is just kind of like starting to set up the composition, and I'm like flicking back and forth from the Render Weekly Instagram page, just trying to get some like references for what other people have done. Because I just wanted to like practice, and I didn't want to spend ages kind of faffing around on what I wanted to do for the layout. Eventually, further down the line, I do end up changing it anyway, but I just wanted like kind of a reference to go off, just so I can just get some sort of lighting and texturing in place, and just make sure everything's looking like it's looking roughly about right. So I've set up a fairly simple glass material. I'm actually using one from one of the guys that works at Corona. I can put a link down in the description below. It's like a really cheap material to buy, and it's what I use for all my glasses. It's got a really nice texture in the bump, which gives those kind of like ripples that you get when you look at reflections on glass, which is really good and helps to add to that realism. So at the moment I'm utilizing Corona's new Sky. So they just brought out an update recently. You can now add multiple Corona Skies, and you can actually implement HDRs directly into the Corona Sky, whereas before you had to use the native Cinema 4D one and then apply a material, but now you can actually do it straight through Corona's Sky, which is nice. Helps to speed up the workflow and just make everything kind of work together well. Here I'm just grabbing some materials from the Corona render library, whilst also updating my Corona. So we've got a fairly simple setup here. I'm tinkering with the materials and I'm tinkering with the lighting. And what I'm actually doing is testing out volumetrics. It's something that I haven't actually touched on much before. And after using it for this project today, it's definitely something which I'm going to use a lot more often when it comes to liquids and glass as well. Essentially how it works is you input a color into your volumetrics, and then you set a distance. So for example, I've put in this like brown reddish color that you see in like Coca-Cola, and what happens is, say if I set 3 centimeters, the light will travel 3 centimeters into that liquid. So essentially the higher you up the volumetrics distance, the more of the color that will show through the liquid, and obviously the less you put in the volumetrics in terms of centimeters, the less of the liquid would be shown. So I think I set it around about 8 centimeters in the end, because I knew the circumference of the glass was about 10 centimeters. So I knew you'd be able to see kind of like 2 centimeters worth of that liquid, which is really nice when you're setting it up in a scene like I am at the moment, where the light is just coming from one direction, because you're going to see the liquid shine on that one side, but it's not going to pass all the way through it, which just helps to add to that contrast. At the moment, what I've done is essentially created a cube, and then I've cut a window out the one side, and I'm shining a Corona sun through that window. At the moment I'm just kind of like tinkering with the settings, figuring out if I want it to be warmer, want it to be cooler. and for some reason I was getting like a really soft shine through the window, which obviously is not what would happen if the sun was shining through, and that was because I set the size of the sun too high. So what I just did there is decrease it down. You get a slightly sharper result, but I didn't make it too small that it was like dead sharp. I wanted a bit of blur on the edges. I then went into the VFB settings, which essentially is like Corona's built-in post-process system, and that's great. You have loads of control over contrast, highlights, shadows. So I've been trying to use that a bit more, as opposed to taking it out into Photoshop and doing those kind of like effects there. It just helps me to keep it all into one program without having to like unnecessarily edit within another. What I've done here is actually kind of like try to create a chromatic aberration effect. I watched this video earlier, which I'll try to find again. I forgot who it was by, but it's a really great video about how you can essentially use the oil tank primitive within Cinema, and put it right in front of the camera lens, and then enable dispersion. What it does is then you get that chromatic aberration effect. Eventually I turned it off because it was making the render times crazy. But yeah, it's definitely an effect that I'm going to explore further for another render. What I'm doing here is that I've seen a lot of renders where they have they cast the shadows of leaves and trees, and I kind of figured out how to do it, and that was to actually create a plane and just apply a leaf material to that plane with the leaves masked out. So all I did was copy the material from the diffused into the opacity, and play with a filter setting to essentially make sure that those leaves are white and then the background's black, just so you can mask the leaves out. You can see, as I'm doing right here, and those leaves then kind of act as like silhouettes for the sun to shine through, and then you get those really nice shadows cast off it. It just helps to kind of add to the personality of the scene a bit as well. Again, kind of just going in, tinkering with the volumetrics, tinkering with the actual shape of the glass, just to take some of the rounding out of the bottom. So you can see here how the volumetrics work. So the light's shining in from the right hand side, and you're seeing the top and the right hand side of the liquid being shown, but the volumetrics are essentially stopping that right hand side of the liquid from being shown, which gives it that nice contrast and also adds to the realism. Again, going back into the VFB settings and just tinkering with those, and this at this point it's a constant kind of back and forth, just tweaking little settings here and there, kind of figuring out what looks best. And then also I'm playing with the caustics, so you get those really nice reflections from the liquid on the floor. What I kind of figured out, and I don't actually fully understand why, but this scene was I could render out tons of passes. I think for the final render I actually rendered about 50 passes and then obviously denoised it, and I was still getting some grain because of the caustics. That might be something that I need to look into a bit more to figure out why that is happening. But yeah, so I'm going to try to figure that out. At this point, because I kind of realized I was having this problem, I looked into using the Corona portal, and that's supposed to take some of the grain out of kind of situations like this where you have a light source. It helps to kind of redirect cinema and figure out where the grain's coming from. It helped a little bit, but I still wasn't getting perfectly crisp results. So like I said, this is something I'm going to figure out and try fix for the next one I do. But we're starting to come towards the end of this render now. I'm just tweaking with really small settings here and there, just figuring out what I think looks best, and I'm setting up the multipass now just so I could take it into Photoshop if I wanted. I did, but all I did was adjust some levels, which I could have done in Corona, to be honest. I could have just upped the contrast and played with the highlights. But yeah, I decided to take it into Photoshop ultimately. Didn't really need to, but there you go. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I thought it was something a bit different, and I kind of realized after I did the last tutorial that it was 2 hours long, and that might have been a bit too much. So I thought, if I just speed down a render that I've done, or speed up a render that I've done, sorry, and just kind of talk about the process. So let me know in the comments section below if you liked this kind of video, if you want to see more of these kind of videos, or if you do actually want me to break down certain bits a bit more, and in that case I can rework this concept to be better. But yeah, thanks for watching guys, and I will catch you in the next video. Peace.